purpose of tonight. What can we do to better inform Pasadena residents of the devastation the tunnel will cause our city? Most of our residents and some businesses seem woefully uninformed, and I couldn't agree more with that. And we didn't talk, frankly, a lot tonight about the actual construction phase, which we heard would cost billions of dollars, but would take years. So certainly think this forum, which is being taped by KPAS, some of us have talked about going out even to neighboring communities and giving a presentation at their city council meetings, because truly if people aren't well informed about this, it becomes pretty clear what the answer is. It says, what would benefit would result if the tunnel was shelved? The Pasadena preferred They were here for the El Nino presentation that we did a couple of years ago. We did one on climate change. We've done one on development in Pasadena and the like. And I think it's certainly fitting that we take on the 710 freeway project and the tunnel in particular here tonight. Let me quickly just introduce some folks that I'm deeply grateful that they're here. And I would start with my colleagues on the City Council, the Honorable Margaret Costin, who is here. There's Margaret. Hey, Margaret. Thank you. And our Vice Mayor, Gina Suda from District 4. I think that part of our goal tonight is to sort of take a reality check about the 710 tunnel and raise people's level of consciousness, provide information about it. I think there's been a suspension of disbelief, if you will, about this threat to our community. And so, again, I'm deeply grateful that my colleagues from other parts of Pasadena are here tonight. There are some legislative representatives here as well, perhaps helpful. In the 30s, the 710 freeway itself was constructed, beginning in Long Beach up to Los Angeles. And then it was probably in the 40s, but for sure by 1950, there was discussion of extending the freeway up from the terminus where it is today. Certainly that's not a progressive modern solution to our transportation needs. So this project really is unlike any other in the country probably in terms of a public policy issue. In terms of here in Pasadena, a couple of milestones were that in 2000, under the leadership of my close friend, mentor, hero, and all of the rest, and I understand he's here tonight too, and so I want to give a big shout out to Bill Bogart. Bill and I came on the city council together in 1999, and he is smarter than I am because he's no longer on the council, but so under Bill's leadership, we brought forward a motion to oppose the 710 freeway extension, or completion as some would call it, and that motion carried, and it was the policy of the city of Pasadena to oppose that. Then the following year, 2001, there was a ballot initiative that supporters of the freeway put on the Pasadena ballot, and although it was overwhelmingly defeated, there was no tunnel back at the time of Measure A. There are now trucks that would flow through in both directions the tunnel, and it would be a toll road. And all three of those things were to the contrary back in 2001. In any event, once again in 2015, under Bill Bogart's leadership, a majority of the council voted to oppose the 710 tunnel, so it is now the official policy of the city of Pasadena to oppose the 710 tunnel. So I want to introduce quickly all three of our speakers, and there are some important milestones coming up as well that we'll talk about tonight, including Measure M, which is the extension, if you will, of Measure R, the county sales tax initiative. The EIR, the final EIR should be forthcoming on this extension of the tunnel sometime next year. There are some alternatives that we want to talk about tonight that would restore that land back to Pasadena and have much better solutions to our transportation needs. So let me, without further ado, introduce quickly our speakers. You probably know all three of them. To my furthest left, and the first speaker will be Stephanos Palazoidis. I'm sorry, actually, let me do it in the order they'll speak. I think Paul Moore is up first. And so to my immediate left, Paul Moore is a principal in Nelson Nygaard Consulting Associates. He has worked on a host of really exciting and progressive initiatives around the country and the world in some of the most interesting cities. And he's going to talk about the state's regional transportation plan. So we'll sort of start at the top of the funnel, if you will, with the regional transportation plan presented by Paul. And then we'll move to next person is Dave Granis, who is a well-known transportation strategist and founding partner of Point C, LLC, a consulting firm. Dave, too, has worked on a host of transportation and other issues. He was part of the 710 working group, and you're hard-pressed to find someone who's more knowledgeable about these issues than Dave Granis. And he'll talk about the Pasadena Preferred Plan. So we're not just against a tunnel, we are for something that's actually very, very exciting. And that gets us to Stephanos Palazoidis, a prominent, renowned architect and urbanist who will talk about a really exciting project that was homegrown and we'd like to bring home to fruition, and that is Connecting Pasadena Project, or CPP. So that'll be the order of the speakers. I've asked them to limit themselves, perhaps better than I've limited myself here in the introduction, to just a few minutes, and then we'll take questions at the end. So let's welcome Paul Moore first. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Paul Moore, as you've heard, and I sometimes introduce myself as a recovering traffic engineer. I spent a lot of my career looking at ways to move more and more cars through spaces until I slowly started to realize that that wasn't always the best thing for those places themselves. While I am conflicted about some of the things that my profession has both accomplished and inflicted on places, I've got to admit I enjoy the charge of excitement that runs through a room when they hear they're about to get 15 minutes of talk from a traffic engineer. I'm sure you're all super excited to hear what's coming up. One of the services I think I can provide, though, is that Metro and Caltrans have written a lot of information about the 710 project. The main part of the body of that is about 2,200 plus pages. That's setting aside some of the ancillary material. I'll just kind of spoiler here. This is not exactly Game of Thrones. Not the most exciting reading. So I think one of the services perhaps I can offer is to let you guys know some of what is in this document, what it actually says. These are the advocates of the project, the people that want the project to happen. So letting you know a little bit of what they say will happen is hopefully something that can help to frame this discussion. So here's some of the facts according to the work that Caltrans and Metro have done. The process itself is a federally and state mandated process for trying to understand what happens when you spend a bunch of money on a transportation project. So it seems like a good idea to study something before we spend $6 to $10 billion building it. These studies all start with what's called a need and purpose statement. They have to state at the outset what they're trying to accomplish, and what this project says it's trying to accomplish is to accommodate regional and local north-south travel demands. Perhaps a noble goal, but certainly not the only thing that's wrong with this part of our region. North-south travel demands in a narrow little strip of the San Gabriel Valley aren't the totality of transportation issues, but this would propose to spend a lot of money solving that problem. What the problem also does what the project also does is it tries to complete something which, as you heard, was conceptualized in the 1950s. There's a little piece of end of a freeway here and a little piece of an end of a freeway there. So if we ask the question, what's the best way to connect these two little ends of the freeway? there's a fairly predictable result that you're going to get from a study that's premised on that basic question. So this is really less about a traffic problem, more about an OCD problem. An agency that has for 50 years, 60 years been trying to do the same thing unsuccessfully, and they just continue to try to do it in different ways. This would be akin to going to Home Depot and saying, something's wrong with my house, and I've got this thing that you could use to solve it. The guy at Home Depot's got a lot of different things that will fit into that little piece of equipment. He doesn't, but you have to told him what the problem is that you're trying to solve. So being more clear about the problems we're trying to solve would be important in any kind of study that we're undertaking here. There are a lot of issues with the study that was put together. One is that environmentally, it makes air quality worse. It increases the amount of driving that people do. It creates more pollution. This is specifically counter to the goals of the state, the goals of the region, and something that I don't think anybody's going to raise their hand and vote for, worse air quality in the region. It increases, as I said, vehicle miles traveled, sorry for the jargon, for the acronyms, vehicle miles traveled, and CO2, carbon dioxide emissions, which contradict the policies of the state and the region. The project also is anecdotally supposed to get rid of all of the traffic congestion on the surface streets. We built this new freeway, and everybody's going to get off the arterial roads, the traffic that you guys sit in. Unfortunately, the study doesn't exactly say that that's what's going to happen. First of all, the traffic that's cut through traffic, in other words, traffic that's trying to get from one side of the local cities to the other, is only about 13% of the traffic that's on these local streets. So it's only a small fraction of traffic that's really making these cut-through trips that presumably these freeway alternatives would solve. And when they looked at putting the freeway in, it only pulled off a portion of that 13%. So depending on the alternatives that we looked at, somewhere between 7 and 10% of those trips on the local arterials got attracted away to some other route as a result of the freeway. So this is not exactly solving those congestion problems that people are hoping that the freeway will solve. And again, this is a report that's written by people that want the project to have congestion improvement. But there are lots of streets in Alhambra, Rosemead, San Marino, Pasadena, and South Pasadena where congestion on the surface streets actually gets worse. So again, we spend $6 to $10 million and traffic on a lot of these surface streets actually gets worse. You can see, again, this is a little bit harder to see, but the oranges and reds are intersections where congestion gets worse. The green are intersections where congestion gets better. Many more oranges and reds than there are greens. Same thing in the evening. Many more orange and red where congestion is getting worse than greens where congestion is getting better. Perhaps more importantly, the EIR ignores a basic fact. That basic fact is that when you build freeway capacity, cars are attracted to that freeway capacity. So this is how it works. The theory from traffic engineers is that if I've got a road with a certain capacity and I widen that road for more capacity, I should be able to accommodate this 20-year congestion that I'm expecting to come, this traffic demand that I'm expecting to come, except people aren't dumb. They see when you widen the road and they shift over, they move to that road, they take trips they wouldn't have otherwise. This is called induced traffic. These curves rise above the capacity that they were intended to solve. And we've seen this happen over and over and over in many places. If you build it, they will come. It's true. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can take the word of Caltrans.
Oh God, look at that.
Caltrans has acknowledged that the state legislature has put into law that induced traffic is real, that this happens. It just so happens that since this study was underway before they decided that this was real, they've exempted this study from having to look at it. So all of the results I've just shown you don't actually include accounting for this new traffic that will show up. So even on a slanted playing field, we're showing minor, if any, benefits for the huge costs that we have. Another big assumption is that this is solving the problem for people who are traveling these vast distances, that people are traveling 30 miles and they're doing part of that on the streets in your cities. The reality of this is most of the trips that are happening on the streets that are congesting them are short trips between local kinds of destinations. So these are trip length maps for East LA College and Caltech. The brighter colors, the oranges and reds, are really, really short trips. The green trips are really, really short trips. The red trips are long trips. So what you're getting is most of the trips going to the destinations, and this shows up at destinations all over. If you look at the trip types, most of the people going to places in your cities are taking relatively short trips. This freeway segment wouldn't be useful to those people. It's not going to move them from where they are because it's not a useful segment in the short trips that almost all the people here are making. The other thing that isn't covered in that study is the opportunity cost. That $6 to $10 billion can't be spent again. The money that was spent widening 405 to less than no effect, to a worsening of what was the 405 before, is money that's gone out the window and spent and can't be spent on anything else. And that's not accounting for the cost to individuals in terms of the tolls that you heard about. So this is not just the region throwing its money at these sort of minor benefits. It's you as the users. Anyone who chooses to use this is going to take money out of your pocket as well for the tolls that will be there. But if we do spend $6 to $10 billion and get the kinds of minor benefits or some worsenings that we talked about, what are the things that we aren't able to do with the money? It's a lot. We can't spend the money on transit, so we can't look at things like pole line completion. We can't look at things like upping the frequency on the Metro link lines to get people better connected to the Burbank Airport or some of the jobs that are around in the region. We can't look at spending money on things that are actually killing people out of the street, the walking conditions and environments of people trying to get to transit, and the danger that people have on the high-speed roads in the area. If we spend just a bit of the money out of that $6 billion, we can put safe crossings on all of these arterial streets and make transit a much safer choice for people where they're not putting their lives at risk. We could take the bike plans that all of the cities around the community are developing and actually put those in place instead of just having those be plans that are sitting on a sheet of paper. We could actually build a bike and pedestrian network in the entire San Gabriel Valley that's the equivalent of Portland, Oregon's bike and pedestrian network for $300 million. A fraction of the $6 to $10 billion that's being spent on this tunnel. We could buy, for $500 million, we could buy transit passes for every college student in the San Gabriel Valley. That alone would pull more driving trips off the road than this tunnel is expected to carry for a tiny fraction of the cost. And this has been proven out. Cal State Long Beach does this. They buy transit passes for their students and they've seen huge drops in the number of people driving to campus. We could build granite boulevards. We could take these sort of big, fast, and a lot of times ugly roads that these dollars would be spent together to benefit the community in ways that are very much more tangible than these small sorts of minor ways that the 710 EIR has suggested can happen with the tunnel project. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Good evening, I'm David Granis. Thanks so much for having me here and thanks for being here. Thank you very much, Steve Madison, for hosting this. This is really important. Paul stole some of my thunder here, so you're going to see some familiar slides, which means those of us that are professionally doing this actually agree with one another, which is unlike the legal community. We actually have some simpatico amongst the transportation community. For those that aren't familiar with it, the Pasadena Working Group was a group that was put together in August of 2014 by the city of Pasadena. We were all just citizen volunteers. There were 7 of us, and the charge we were given was really, as former Mayor Bogart said, was we got to figure out what we're for. We kind of have a good idea what we're against. And so what might we do? And Paul did a great job of kind of walking us through kind of the beginnings of this and then some of the things that could happen. That working group actually spent a fair amount of time looking at how we would do that differently, but within the same concept and context of the EIR. So this project, this is a map from February 28, 1958. So this was adopted by the state of California on that day, which preceded my being conceived or being brought into the world by 22 days. So this has been around longer than me, and I've been around a long time. But you'll notice on this map all the connections and all the ones that never were made. All right, and there's a lot of reasons for that. but part of it is what I call just kind of human evolution and basic understanding of what we need, and things change. So if 100 years ago, this is important to set some context, if 100 years ago you were to ask somebody, how would you improve your mobility? How could you get better transportation? They might have said they just needed a faster horse. And actually, 100 years ago, that was a mode of travel that was very popular. What happened is, as places grew, new mobility came along. And that new mobility was generally mass transit. It was focused on moving people. It was not focused on moving vehicles. It was a vehicle to move people, not people in vehicles. All right? Now, it's great to romanticize how this old streetcar system, that Los Angeles had the most robust transit system in the world in the middle of the 20th century. In the world. Okay? And we took it out. Now, we can look back and say, what a horrible generation to have done that. That's just awful. You're bad people. But the reality is that what their experience was in that time frame, in that context, was this wasn't all that pleasant. It was slow, it was hot, it was smelly, all right? And then this guy comes along. And Henry Ford exceeded his own expectations by far. The notion of having a car in every garage or in every driveway. What this was really about, it was about personal mobility and upward mobility. It was a symbol of success. That's what it became. It's much like, at least when I grew up, I couldn't envision paying more than a quarter for a cup of coffee, but we pay $4 for a cup of coffee today. That's because it's an experience. It's not a cup of coffee. You get the music, you get a made-up word called barista, right? So this was an experience. And so for our predecessors, this was success. This was something that they aspired to. And there weren't a lot of them, so we were able to share the infrastructure. So that's what it looked like. So you see a streetcar there. Actually, there are horses and there are vehicles. But as this became more popular and we grew and the population grew, it got a little crowded. And then it became about, this is my road. What's this stupid streetcar doing on here? What's that horse and buggy doing on it? This is my road. And it got to a point where this became congested. But we were so fixated on this that we moved into what I call monoculture. All right? What we had before was moving people was diverse. We had a bunch of different ways of doing it. Diversity actually works really well. All right? And now we had moved into this adoption of we've got to build these highways, we've got to move these cars. Exactly what Paul talked about in his diagram of expanding capacity to handle the 20-year demand. It's that notion of we just build it and we can accommodate more and more and more. And it's fallacious. It's not true. So this is actually a picture of the construct of the 210. This is very similar to what is being proposed. 50 years, 60 years on. All right? So this sets a little context of what we were all about at the working group, and I wanted to share some of that. Most importantly, what we learned is, as we had this monoculture, there were unintended consequences. These are things we didn't know. Unintended means we didn't really intend to do this, right? And I want to point these out very carefully because as the working group looked at what to do, what we thought was, how many of these are still unintended, or do we know enough to know not to do this? So we have congestion, pollution, and yes, road rage. So these were the unintended consequences of what we were up to. But some of the consequences were really, and Stephanos is going to talk about this in terms of an opportunity. But what this is a picture of the construction of the 101 freeway. And down there in that ditch was a community. And those communities were connected. And we were able to walk. We were connected to our neighbors. We were connected to a grocery store. We were connected to our schools. And this started to disconnect us. And that was another major unintended consequence. So the real question before the working group is, what can we be for that actually brings communities back together, moves people, not just vehicles, and creates a quality of life, an economy in life, and an equity in terms of access to mobility. One last piece that I want to share. Paul touched on it in his slide, and you'll see a similar slide up here in a minute, but This is a graph of exactly, done by INRIX, of exactly the performance of the 405 expansion for 1.1 billion. So if you think that, you know, gosh, we got the environmental impacts wrong, but boy, we invested the money wisely. No, not so much. Not so much. It has actually been a degradation of travel time on the 405 for 1.1 billion. So it's exactly as he said, and that's, I won't even bother you with that same slide, because even Caltrans is now singing the song. Yes, Virginia, there is more traffic when you expand the roadway system. We now admit that. So the working group really focused, and I won't spend a lot of time on this, but really it was move people, not vehicles. That's what we were for, okay? And we had a variety of strategies on how to approach that. You know, look at our existing resources and evaluate those. I use a computer analogy. I think computer analogy is great. So we have hardware, that's infrastructure. We've got software, that's plans. We don't have an operating system. Computers don't work without an operating system. We need an operating system. We need an intentional way of operating our mobility. And so that's what we looked at. How do we create these choices and create intention in terms of what we want out of it? So these are actual screenshots from what the working group presented to the city back in April, I think, of 2015, if I recall correctly. This is just kind of the existing system that's out there in plan. What this was all about was really looking at, these are the rail lines, there's obviously a lot more to it than that, but it shows you kind of the rebuild in the nascent, emergent kind of rebuild of our transit system that we once had. We started looking at our local street system, and that current system is really important because it's an asset. Don't think of it as a street, it's an asset. So how do we operate it for the future? How do we create a diversity of mode choices or of transportation choices in that system? So complete streets is something that the city has espoused. It's something that nationally has been proven to increase safety, reduce congestion, and so what we looked at is, and all really a complete street is making it available to more than one mode. So bikes, pedestrians are treated equally. It's all about moving people, not moving a vehicle. And so that becomes the core locally of an intentional operating system for better mobility. How do we connect that then? We started looking sub-regionally. And so we added some arterials to that. We looked at Fremont, looked at Fair Oaks, looked at Marengo, looked at all these. How could that be done differently if you started connecting this together? Because this is not just about Pasadena. It is about how we connect to other areas and how other areas connect to us. It's about us as a region, which Paul very, very articulately and well discussed. So we created really a set of multimodal connections. And here's the key. In the EIR for the 710, what they do is they look at alternatives. And so we looked at those very alternatives, but we did something a little bit different. What they do in the EIR is they say, okay, here's the bus rapid transit or the BRT alternative, and then over here is the light rail alternative, and we're going to silo and segment those. Well, that's not how a mobility system should operate. It should all work together. So where you have complete streets and where you have transit, where you have bus rapid transit, and in the future you have autonomous vehicles, and we have the ability to do micro-transit, and we can do better bike systems and scooters, and I mean, how many have seen the Irby running around town? That's a friend of mine that invented that thing. This is where we're headed. Uber and Lyft. How many people 5 years ago thought that you would pay somebody to ride in their car, not knowing them? But look at how many people do that today. So things change. And so what this was all about is connecting. And then when you look at this regionally, just like Paul said, what we looked at is, gosh, we could connect to East LA Community College. We could connect to the Silver Line, which is very popular. The Silver Line is doing very, very well, as Member Najarian can tell you. We connect to the Green Line. We use Rosemead. What's missing in this part of the world is kind of north-south connectivity. So we focused on that, and we connected it up to our local street network. Our stuff. If we focus on this as opposed to focusing on that tone, we can connect a lot of these new proposed lines, like the Whittier extension, like the Santa Ana Bridge extension. We can actually connect to that. We can reconnect our region again and become a very robust, very, very connected place. Why should we do this? 2 words: demographics and choice. Take a look at that. 2/3 of the people represented on that slide are either me, boomers, or millennials. As a boomer, at some juncture in the not too distant future, I am going to be looking for other mobility choices because I am not going to either be able to, wish to, afford to drive. Millennials, this is the generation that we've seen has eschewed driver's licenses, has not wanted to drive. They want other choices. They want walkable urban. They're on scooters, they're on buses, they're on skateboards, they're on bicycles. They don't own cars. They use Uber and Lyft as if it were their car, because it's more affordable. You combine those two generations, and that demography is demanding different choices, and monoculture isn't the choice. That's why. So we know now, these are now known consequences. Apologies to Mr. Bean, one of my favorite characters. But we know what the consequences are. And we know that there are alternatives. And when you put all these things together, and that's just in today's context, I mean, there's a whole new world coming in terms of the merger of technology and mobility. And when you start thinking about that, we're intentional about how we organize ourselves as a community, how we organize our mobility, we have a wonderful opportunity and a wonderful future ahead of us. And again, who would have thought just a few years ago that these guys would even exist and be one of the highest capitalized startups in the world? Okay, mind-boggling. But it's serving a purpose. Mobility is changing in people's minds because demographics and choices are changing. And so, one of my heroes is Buckminster Fuller, and I think that just soak that in. I think what we really need to do is think about this a little bit differently. Instead of thinking about changing, what's there based upon the current system, let's just design a whole new operating system, and then we can change our future reality from that. Thank you.
And particularly neighborhoods with poorer people and people of color, only in the New York region, 500,000 people were displaced through the construction of freeways. And how do we know the system has failed, or the idea has failed? Well, per what you heard a minute ago from David, half or less of the freeway system was built in Los Angeles because of neighborhood resistance. And in fact, I think it's an extreme exaggeration to say there's any reason to complete this gap as a overwhelming regional necessity, where most of the system was actually not constructed. So I would like you to see this image on the left of the gap, of the 710 gap in Pasadena, as an indication of failure, and as an indication of a moment in time in which we find ourselves being asked to do something about reclaiming this place and making it again a part of our community. I'm here as a person representing a very small organization called the Connecting Pasadena Project, of about a dozen of your fellow citizens who a year and a half ago got together with another 150 or so people over 2 meetings in a charrette in the Maranatha School, trying to find a path towards this kind of resolution, getting from simply disliking the notion or being against the notion of the completion of the freeway, and directing ourselves to the much more positive perspective of actually doing something about it. So we held 2 charrettes for 2 Saturday mornings, one in the fall of 14 and the other in the spring of 15, and asked the people who showed up, about 150 of us, to discuss 2 fundamental issues. The first issue was the question of how to actually generate a better transportation system through this part of our city. And one of them on the right was an alternative which I will not describe to you in detail, but an alternative which accepted the gash the way it was and tried to build in the context of the gash. And the other one on the right was an alternative to fill in benefits on behalf of all of us. And here is the street network, which is meant to be a street network of complete streets or multimodal streets. And it's a very simple subject in Pasadena because we have such streets in this neighborhood, and all we're doing here is we are driving every single street through its traditional right-of-way and completing the network the way it was in 1955. The result is that the same traffic that is there now, going north-south and east-west, is redistributed in two-way streets. There is no more traffic tomorrow under the scheme that there is today, and there are many more ways of distributing this traffic, overall, therefore, reducing the level of congestion in this part of the city. And the introduction of new uses and new densities is of a kind here that certainly would not be any different in terms of its distribution of trips than it may be in any other part of Pasadena. And most certainly, the level of congestion we're experiencing in Pasadena is but a fraction of what people are experiencing in other parts of the city, particularly on the west side. So the most important subject from both transportation and image and placemaking perspective is that Pasadena Avenue could turn here into a 200-foot wide boulevard that is, in our mind's eye, the equivalent of something like Commonwealth Avenue in Boston, a grand boulevard with almost a 7-foot median, which can be used as a park for almost 10 blocks going through the city. One of the most important potential places in the body of our city. And this very silly diagram, which I'm sure it's not visible, it is detailed for most of you in this room, is merely a reiteration at any time of the day. When was the last freeway that you saw built that actually resolved any traffic issue whatsoever? This is what they're telling us is going to happen. It defies common sense and it defies logic. And we thought as 12 community members that the easiest way to do this would be to actually try to provide drawings that show what this place may be like as in the very integrated way that David talked about when it came to transportation, or in the very integrated way I tried to talk about myself when it came to buildings and public space. And these are the two drawings that we generated. This is the gash looking north-south. You can see the mountains and downtown Pasadena on the right. And this is what this place looks like when we take the intensity of building that we're proposing and we insert it in the gash. These are the single-family houses and duplexes and so on, the low-density buildings on the south. The big green in the middle is the boulevard, and you can see how the density increases until you get into Old Pasadena. And you can also see how the Old Pasadena densities are, and the buildings in Old Pasadena seem to be higher than and denser than what is being proposed here. And then the second alternative drawing that we provided is even more dramatic, and this is a Google Earth view, essentially flying over the 210 134th intersection, and this is what this place would look like restored back to the city. This is the boulevard going north-south to the left, and you can see the taller 5-6-story office buildings transitioning to housing, the campus on the right where Maranatha is today, and then back to smaller buildings all the way south. So please go forward thinking about this as a unique, extraordinary possibility for the fiscal and financial future of our city, and also as a way of taking a huge piece of land, 60 acres, and making it totally integrated and totally brought back to the normal life that we expect of every other part of our great city. Thank you very much.
Among the four, these were wonderful, wonderful speakers and experts, and can we thank them again for their comments. As we prepare for the questions, I wanted to do a couple of things. One is I had a couple of thoughts as I listened to each of the speakers. Paul reminded me of the tragedy of the commons, which is this notion that, well, there's a freeway, I can take the freeway, it improves my commute or my trip, and yet then overconsumption quickly eliminates the benefits of that, not just for that individual, but for all. I recall talking to a Caltrans, a traffic engineer, PhD, highly educated person, and I said, what causes traffic jams? And he had a far-off look in his eye, and he said, usually it's because too many people try to use the road at the same time. And I said, oh, and then I realized that that wasn't an answer at all. It's a fallacy to think that if you simply add more and more lanes. So I appreciate Paul's comments very much. Dave addressed Measure M and put up the summary that Metro has put forth in terms of Measure M. And you'll remember that there was Measure R, which was a sales tax assessment. And now as that sunsets, Measure M essentially picks it up. And there are designated projects under each initiative. So there was $750 million under Measure R for the, it wasn't exactly the extension of the 710, it was improvements of the problem solutions. And my understanding is that Metro has spent over $50 million of that so far on the EIR, and it will may get up to even twice that when that's all said and done. Far, fraction of the many, many billions that might be needed if they were to go forward. And in terms of Measure M specifically excludes the extension of the 710 from the projects that would be funded under Measure M. Of course, for some of us, dollars are fungible, and we fear that those in support might look and find for funds elsewhere after Measure M passes. And of course, Measure M will be on the November ballot, and there are many, many initiatives on the ballot, so it'll be an interesting vote for sure. And as you look at that Measure M proposed project, that great graphic that Dave showed, you'll notice, for example, there is no Metro Rail connection between Pasadena and the Burbank Airport. And at Burbank, we're building a new terminal. It's a wonderfully efficient and convenient regional airport. And how wonderful it would be, wouldn't it, to have the Gold Line extend to the west from Pasadena, and one could go for day trips or even greater trips on the Gold Line or whatever the line was, out to the airport, take your flight, come home, use the same way. Those are the kinds of forward-looking projects we should be considering. And Stefanos talked about recovering this, and it's an important point, isn't it, that this isn't some bold proposal to take land from someone. This is our city that was taken from us, and there were and there are neighborhoods there. And so, as you know, Caltrans acquired several hundred homes. The others were destroyed, and so I've been thinking about the term repatriate. That really what we're doing is repatriating this valuable sacred space back to our city where it belongs, and having really local control. So I want to turn. Numbers are overwhelming in the positive, but I think that that's really important, and to communicate with other communities that look, this isn't just about us. This is about our entire region, and we're this crucible here that is dealing with this legacy project that's been around as long as I have anyway. And there are better ways to do this, and we can invest our money better, but there's also better environmental outcomes and better outcomes for people in terms of access to mobility. So I think that advocacy, but keep in mind that the cost of this is prohibitive versus what you get if you invest a fraction of that, like Paul said, in other things. Well put, Dave. I think on a more perhaps practical political level, Mayor Garcetti and Governor Brown, in my view, wield tremendous power here, and they've been somewhat close to their chest in terms of this issue, and I think there will come a time where we make a strong demand to them to put the final stake in the heart of this. We have a question: if Measure M is defeated, will the chances of permanently killing the 710 project become more likely? That's a hard one to speculate. I don't know, Paul, if you have a sense of that.
I think there's a couple of factors to consider. I mean, one that you brought up is the idea that dollars are fungible, and if the money from Measure M isn't available for some of these things that people clearly want in Measure M, that might put pressure on people to repurpose some of the dollars, the imaginary dollars that would have paid for 710. But I would also say that You know, there are some of the ideas, like the mayor keeping things close to his vest, is probably partly because he's so supportive of Measure M and doesn't want to jeopardize that. If that isn't a political reality anymore, perhaps there's more latitude to think differently on the topic of the 710. So I'm not a politician and don't know exactly how all those things work, but I think there's probably pluses and minuses with regard to the 710's fate as it relates to Measure M.
I would say it would be a little bit of cutting our nose out despite our face to oppose Measure M, which does not include, on its face, this project, and does have a number of very important regional forward-looking transportation opportunities. But it is a political question, as you know. We had a question about, and I think there's just a misunderstanding in the question that Stefanos, you can clarify, were other architects or architectural firms other than Moulin Paulazoidis involved? Have others created plans